I mentioned earlier that I'm coming to you from my living room this morning, and before me is a coffee table that I inherited from my father. My father, in his later life, had a habit of buying a lot of the New York Times bestseller list books, which lived unread in ever growing piles, as did the New Yorkers and the copies of the Sunday New York Times on this very coffee table. He always felt like he would get to them, and once he even almost missed a plane trying to run with a shopping bag full of New Yorkers spilling out across the airport. One of the joys of this distinctly unjoyful time in these last couple years is that I've reconnected with two important practices. One is finding sources of information that are reliable and newsworthy and scientifically grounded. And the other is getting some of these digitally so that things don't pile up on this table. I'm not quite sure that that's working, but anyway. One of my pandemic delights is the digital version of the New Yorker magazine, and I share with you this morning the headline from yesterday's satirical Borowitz report, which in this era of fake news now has to carry the disclaimer that it is, in fact, not real news. Anyway, this was Andy Borowitz's lead. Although much about the coronavirus remains unknown, an expert said, we are learning a lot about some of the conditions that enable it to thrive, like incompetence, laziness, and ignorance. So today I want to put forward two more reasons and potential causes: the emphasis on hypercapitalism, consumerist behavior that has led so many of us to be just a paycheck away from economic ruin, and the lack of confidence in our own inner resources. There are three images from my week this week that I want to share with you. The first is the amazing members, Les and Sue Polgar, delivering directories to more than 50 of our members because we know that some people might not have the resources to download a directory from our drive, and they wouldn't have the ability to phone a friend, and that's so important right now. The second image is empty driveways in my neighborhood as people whose work trucks have been lying idle in those driveways for weeks seemed now to all be back at looking for work. Some because of financial need, and at least one because of our president's call, as he explained to me. The third image was of getting caught in an awful traffic jam on Friday on 680 after going to the church to process mail, which is one of my pandemic duties. Until this week, in the whole month of April, I had not seen more than a trickle of cars on that road at one time. Now, many people need to work and to have money for food and necessities. And as our nation's death toll mount, we have less of that in our area because we have not. We have experienced amazing state and local leadership early on, and we need to honor both that our flatter curve will also be a longer curve, and we need to honor that we, in fact, have the inner fortitude to do this. Whether we are alone at home or alone in our dwelling, all of us are having to rely more on inner wisdom these days, even if we're surrounded by other people. Whether we're learning to cut our own hair or how to stay out of our partner's hair or how to avoid a hairy meltdown from a housebound child or a housemaid or a helper in our assisted living situation, none of us are immune. Krista Tippett, the host of the On Being show, says, strangely and interestingly, one of the great challenges of a life is to learn to be alone peaceably at home in oneself. And now, she says, we have all at once, by way of a virus, been sent inside physically and emotionally, even if we're not home on our own. We're forced at best to work out the difference between isolation and loneliness, and to have a new ease within the aloneness inside ourself called solitude. The quest to know oneself has long been part of our religious tradition. Life passed through the fire of thought, is something that we were encouraged to do. And Margaret Fuller was a 19th century proto-feminist, and one of ours, a writer who hung out with Emerson, Thoreau, and the like, and was one of the first writers to talk about what would really predict the work of Carl Jung and others later, saying that we have within us an innate wisdom into which we can tap. As soon as the soul can affirm clearly that a certain demonstration is wanted, it is at home, she says. The trick is that we need to have the time and the intention to tap into this internal holy, as Laura's song reminds us. At this point, we ought to have it down because most of us are largely staying in these days. What a time to explore our own hearts and our own beings, our own sources of wisdom. I remember attending my first silent retreat as a 30-year-old and being shocked at how noisy it was. It was the noise of my own self, so glad to have the chance to express and engage in its own internal dialogue. I had expected to be lonely and unstimulated in those days. And in fact, I was overwhelmed by the clamor of the inner speak. And for those of you who are living with others and lamenting the lack, perhaps, of such nourishing silence, silent retreats also taught me the delightful, companionable nature of spending time together in quiet. And that, too, has become core to my well being. In the spirit of 20th century poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who said, "Love consists of this, that two solitudes meet, protect, and greet one another." Buddhist author Stephen Batchelor says we can learn to actually create a solitude in which we feel at home and grounded. We can somehow open up a non-reactive space within us. The practice of solitude is the practice of creating an inward autonomy within ourselves, an inward freedom from the power of overwhelming thoughts and emotions. What a tool that would be for now, and what a time this is to get to know our own inner wisdom. We know that threats to well-being are also posed from loneliness and disconnection. And many among us face the economic necessity to be in the world. I plead with all of us, though, to take this time to see what resources are not just within our closets and unexplored, now tidied shelves, but also those that are within our own minds, our own hearts, and our own lived experiences. This is the time for spiritual spring cleaning, which, by the way, I invite you to join in a conversation about on Thursday nights. We're going to start looking in May at timeless texts, which can offer us guidance as well. Stephen Batchelor, who has a new book on solitude, says this: our own interiority is a field of ethical behavior. In other words, when we practice mindfulness, we can recognize that we're confronted with a choice to go along with the fantasy that is about to burst out or not. That's an ethical choice. And actually saying, it's better not to get caught up in that story. I'm preferring to choose to be still and to let that go. I cannot tell you how glad I am, as your minister, that among my duties today in this message is not to be before you and ask you not to imbibe dangerous household fluids, because I actually suspect that there are religious leaders, as much as we might laugh, around the country wrestling with that this morning. Another recent New Yorker cartoon does allow us to laugh. It's by Jason Adam Katzenstein, and it says this. It's a picture of two people talking, and one of them says, "Personally, I worry that with everyone wearing masks, readers won't be able to tell who in the cartoon is speaking." You know, masks, ever fun and beautiful, like the ones that our congregation is producing for so many, are not that fun to wear. We understand that, especially as it gets hotter. So when you put on your mask each time, think about it as your own faithful act, the respect you give to your own worth and dignity, and the acknowledgement you give to all of our interconnection. My friends, if you have not yet used these first weeks of sheltering in place to tap into your own inner resources, the good news is you still have time to do it. Our faith calls on us to respect each life and to recognize that we are linked together. That is what is holy for us. And let it us summon that in these increasingly challenging days. And remember that we are all in this together. Please do wear a mask. If you need one, we've got some to share. Maintain the difficult and life-saving physical distancing. Connect online, we can help. Call a friend. In this way, we will be guided by our inner wisdom and our shared faith values to make informed and ethical choices. May we be the ones to make it so.
And now let's sing our closing hymn, number 348 in the Gray Book. If you have the book, Guide My Feet. The words will be on your screen.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
So I hope that you too have taken on the habit that I have now of lighting an actual chalice wherever you are, and we will in a moment extinguish it. But before we do, I'd like us to take a moment and light a candle from our chalice. We have not lost a member. Please do not worry about that. But I do want to acknowledge that our nation has lost 50,000 people. And I want to light this candle for these are all our family too. And we will extinguish our chalice with these words from Maya Angelou. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. May we take the warmth of this community and the fire of commitment into our weeks, into our days, and into our every choice.